Welcome back. This week's project is going to be a raised bed planter. I plan on making several, and this is the first and the largest of a set I want to get done before the end of spring. Like every wood project, we're going to start by making large pieces of wood into smaller pieces of wood. Here I am cutting down the two sizes I will need for the frame of the planter, the corners with the rails and the sides. The corners and the rails will be the same size, 36 inches. In other words, it will be as wide as it is tall. The sides will be 20 inches in length. I am strategically cutting two pieces for the rails and one for the sides out of each 2x4 to minimize waste. Thinking ahead and coming up with a cut list is pretty important. Next, I'm going to cut each 2x4 in half. The finished size of most of these pieces will be 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Most, but we'll get to that in a moment. Next, I'm going to take yes, all of these pieces and cut them down to a finished size of 1.5 inches. The reason for cutting them directly in half is that I can use the nice straight edge up against the fence as a reference, and I can take off that rounded over edge that most 2x4s have. Now, before anyone jumps on me for not using pressure treated wood, I will be sealing these off later in the video, and this was the first one where mistakes will likely be made. Also, the pressure-treated 2x4s available were, shall we say, less than desirable. I do, however, recommend using pressure-treated wood if availability and decent quality. The trade-off here is I'll likely have to reseal these every few years. Keep those edges, though. They're good for making little Easter baskets, which you'll see in a different video. Next thing to do is put 4 of those 36-inch pieces aside. They are for the corners, and we'll deal with those shortly. We need to cut half-inch rabbets in 6 of the 36-inch rails and 4 of the 20-inch sides. Being aware of which sides are the nicest is helpful here. I'm going rustic, so I didn't mind an outer 5. Now let's grab those 4 corners. I am measuring how deep I want the bed on top and how far off the ground I want the shelf. I decided on 12 inches depth for the bed and 6 inches off the ground for the shelf. So from the bottom, I'm measuring up 6 inches, 19 inches, and 32 inches. Each rail inside will be placed above the line I am making. I am also measuring up 33.5 inches for a decorative groove I will put in shortly. Now I'm going to cut in a little decorative pyramid on the top of each corner. I accomplished this by setting the miter saw to 45 degrees and marking the very center of one of the faces on top. I aimed the blade to the center mark and begin cutting, rotating the piece with each cut. When I'm said and done, I have a nice little point that would make Ramsay II or Buffy the Vampire Slayer proud. Once you're done with that, the next thing I decided was a little groove for a detail. Fun fact, I decided this way later, but through the magic of video editing, I can pretend I decided this right this moment. I played around with different depths and sizes, but settled on 3/16 of an inch and a 1/4 inch deep. So I set the depth of my blade to 1/4 inch and made 2 passes with a table saw at that 33.5 inch mark we made earlier. I was going to use the stop block mechanism on my crosscut saw, but because I did this after creating the points, the stop was too skinny and it moved around the tip. So I had to switch to a thicker block so the piece wouldn't move. Next, it was just cutting all the little grooves and rotating the pieces. I had to move the stop block before making the second pass to achieve the 3/16 inch width I was looking for. Once I filed them out a bit, I was left with a nice little detail I was proud of. Next, I measured 3/4 of an inch on each piece and marked it so I could pre-drill for the screws I would be using to attach everything. I marked them because each side would have screw placement and I didn't want the sides and the rail screws to collide. I offset them slightly, then I began to countersink each visible screw so I can plug it later. I know it's just for the backyard, but it doesn't mean we can't do it the right way. No one wants to ever see screws. After that, it was time to start assembling. After marking everything, I laid everything out, remembering that the top 2 rails would have opposing rabbets where I will fill them in later with slats. After adding some helpful hands, I started screwing everything together with 2-inch deck screws and some glue. I decided to do the front and back first, then attach the sides. The sides take 2 of the 4 rabbited sides, and the bottom is the 2 remaining pieces that have no rabbet. This is for the shelf, so there is no need to put a rabbet there. It'll make sense in a little bit. After that was done, I had something that resembled a frame. The last thing I decided to do was to reinforce the bed because of the tons of soil it was going to have, and reinforce the shelf on the bottom. Now, if you have been following along, you should have four pieces of 36-inch, 1.5-inch square left over, probably wondering, why do I have extra parts? This is what they are for. But you're going to have to take one step I forgot to record and cut them all down to 1 inch by 1.5 inches. This is also when an evil little 12-year-old who should be doing his homework decided to scare the poop out of his dad. Let's see that again in slow motion just for fun. After I composed myself, I began attaching the supports. I measured the middle of the sides for the top support under the bed and the support in the middle of the shelf. I attached using a little glue and pocket screws. You could attach this with the pocket screws facing up or down, just a matter of preference, but I decided facing up because the shelf panels would hide the screws, so I chose up. The last step before finishing the frame was to plug all the holes. I glued the end of the dowel rod, tap it into place using a flush cut saw to cut off the excess, and keep repeating until all the holes have been plugged. Then it's on to my favorite part, the endless sanding. And sanding I did, every little nook and cranny. Next, it was on to finish. I finished using a tinted weather seal. Some people might not know that you can get your sealant tinted. I decided on black because it's all the rage right now, and I think it looks pretty cool. I'm using fence panels for the slats and opted for a nice golden pecan, whatever stain. I decided to stain all of them at the exact same time. After the stain had dried, I had cut all the panels for the sides and bottoms. I recommend measuring, as sometimes wood shifts a little and your measurements may be a little different. For mine, the sides, front, and back ended up being a hair shy of 11 inches. I needed 21 of them, but depending on your size and what pickets are available to you, you may need a different number. I set up a stop block and cut them all. I then needed to cut the bottom of the bed and shelf. Those ended up being 19 3/4 inches, and I needed 14 of them. All in all, I used 8 fence pickets to get what I needed. Next, it was just a matter of attaching them using the rabbets we cut earlier. I used some small finish nails, 3/4 inch, and a little bit of glue to attach them. You will need to cut the very last piece down for each end for each surface of the panel. I decided to leave a 16th or an eighth of an inch for drainage. I could have used something to gauge, but doing it by eye worked pretty well for me. I then switched to doing the bottom. I recommend paying attention to the surfaces you are using. You have two choices, the top or the bottom. Put the nicest surface up. It's a great opportunity to pick out how you want it to look. I will tell you it's a small place to work in. When you move to doing the inside of the bed, I recommend getting close to your project. I mean, really get in there. Show it some love. Say nice things to it. When you are all done, you should have something that looks cool, ready for a summer of flowers or produce. That's it for this time, but shoot me a like and a follow if you enjoyed the video. As always, thank you.